the people who basically did paddle sports lived on average, I think 7 or 8 years longer than the average person. Okay. So
Okay.
those who did badminton, are you ready for this? Badminton, 6.2 years longer than the average person.
Oh my goodness.
And then the person who did tennis, 9.2 years longer. My name is Mike Fallat. I own the #1 book creation service for entrepreneurs known as Dream Starters Publishing, and I want to help you bring your story to life in a book so you can use that book to generate leads and attention for your business. Contact me today. Welcome to another episode of $1 Million Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. You know, I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're out there and you want to write a book, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. We can help you out with wherever you're at in the process. And if you already have a book, you want to generate leads with it for your business, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. This book is absolutely perfect for those who are maybe planning that next stage of their life. My dad recently, I don't know, past couple of years retired from work, and I'm able to see how he lives and how he has changed. And now that he lives by himself since my mom passed away, I see how it's definitely an identity shift. And he's trying to find these things around the house to do to keep him busy. And that's why I'm very curious about this book that we're about to talk about. It's called Keys to a Successful Retirement: Staying Happy, Active, and Productive in Your Retired Years. And we have the author with us today, Fritz Gilbert. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Hey, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. It sounds like you were about to retire, or you were just starting to retire, and that's when you put this book together. So how did it all come about? And also, can you give us a quick little background on where you come from and what got you to where you're at now?
Sure. Let me start with that, and then we'll get into the book. So I typical career path, I guess. Went to college, got out of college, did a couple interviews, landed a job in the aluminum industry. Figured, well, it's not really what I want to do, but I'll do it for a couple of years, get some experience. 33 years later, I retired from the aluminum industry at 55 years of age. So I rode the horse the whole way through.
Wow,
And
early retirement though, 55. That's pretty awesome.
got out early, so that was awesome. And it was never really a major goal of mine. It just kind of happened. We'd always kind of saved aggressively, but not kind of fire aggressively. And every time I got a pay raise, say I got a 3% raise, I'd increase the savings maybe 2% and take an extra 1% home. Kind of minimize the lifestyle inflation and increase your savings rate along the way. And you do that over a 30-year career, and guess what? It can lead you to an early retirement if you do it right. So that was my story. And married, got a wonderful daughter and a granddaughter now who's 5 years old. So retired. We were in Atlanta when I retired, and we relocated up to the mountains in the southern Appalachian Mountains on the Georgia-Tennessee border. And that's where I'm at now. I built this recording studio, writing studio a couple of years after I retired, and we're loving life up here in the mountains. So it's cool.
Nice.
So the book, 3 years before I retired, I was just kind of starting to explore, what do I want to do when I retire? Let's start a couple things as experiments, see what sticks. And I started writing a blog called The Retirement Manifesto, just kind of on a whim, and didn't really know much about writing, had corporate emails for years, obviously, things like that. But turns out, Mike, I just love the writing process, and I really enjoyed writing. So I wrote every single week for 6 straight years on my blog, grew a pretty decent audience with it. So that was 3 years before I retired. I started that. The book came around 2 years after I retired. And what it does is it basically looks at, I had a very smooth transition to retirement. We're absolutely loving life. A lot of people struggle with that transition. And my wife and I, surprisingly smooth transition. And we are absolutely embracing retirement. We love this stage of life. So it was really an opportunity to look back 2 years after the fact and say, okay, I've been writing for 5 years. I've lived it. What did I do in those last couple of years of work that helped make that transition so smooth? And basically, out of all the things I've written, what are the top tips? What are the best suggestions I can give to the world that can help them replicate success in the transition to retirement? So that's kind of what the genesis was about.
Wow. And so I looked through a little bit of your book, and it talks about how it's like baking a cake. Now, I didn't
Yep.
understand that because I didn't read that chapter, but can you explain that to our audience?
Yeah, the premise was, you've got to think about what are you trying to build? You're trying to build a successful retirement, right? Well, let's think about it from a baking analogy. What are you trying to bake? I'm trying to bake a cake. Okay. So what ingredients do you need to put into the product you're trying to make and in what order do you put those ingredients in, right? So what do you leave out? It's the analogy is pretty good, because if you think about, I use eggs as an example too. Eggs I use as a replica for money. You've got to have enough eggs, because you can't go ask your neighbor for eggs after you retire, right? So you've got to have the financial stability, the financial independence. So there's a chapter on that. You know, how do you make sure you're ready to retire? How do you do the math? 4% rule, stuff like that. And then more importantly, it gets into the real focus of the book. It's on the non-financial side of it, which is mindset, really a big part of it. Pursuing your curiosity, things like that. Those are really elements that go into the cake, right? You've got to be intentional and say, I'm going to have a positive mindset about this. I wrote a post shortly before I retired called The 10 Commandments of Retirement. And what they were kind of, what are the guiding principles I want to apply to my retirement? This was very close to my retirement date. And it was really just setting my mindset for, what do I want my mental attitude to be as I go into this transition. And I tell you what, Mike, it's hanging behind me up on that bookshelf on the side of it. I still look at it. You know, number one was have an attitude of gratitude. And as I look through that list of the 10 Commandments, they're really focused on the non-financial aspects of retirement and you know, being generous, giving back. You could argue that might be some financial, but my wife started a nonprofit, which we're now very active in retirement. Wow. So a lot of the principles, pursue your curiosity. I mentioned that earlier. You know, this studio that I'm in now, there's a woodworking shop on the other side of that wall. That kind of came about through pursuing my curiosity. Now I build dog houses for my wife's charity. I should mention that, it's called Freedom for Fido. And we build free fences for low-income families that have dogs on chains. It's awesome. We got 130.
Oh, that's a great charity, man.
It's cool. We got 200 volunteers involved now. We've got, you know, big annual fundraisers. We've built 130 fences. We've freed over 300 dogs from life on a chain. It's much bigger in my life than my writing is, to give you a sense of scale. It's a really significant thing. But we also need to build dog houses and shelters and stuff like that. That kind of led into the woodworking and the shop. So again, this ties into the book, pursuing curiosity, having that lifelong learning gene. That's one of the ingredients you got to make sure is in your retirement cake. So back to your question, the analogy of baking a cake is really thinking about what elements do you want to make sure you grab onto as you're getting into the retirement transition.
Wow. Yeah. It seems like you really found things to occupy your mind, but it was things that wasn't just like, all right, let me just replace it with something. It was, let me find out, maybe do some soul searching. What do I really want to do with my time? What do I want to be known for? Was it almost as if you were kind of planning what was my legacy afterwards? So, okay, a charity, I know that that's important, but also I better do something meaningful, which means giving back. Writing is a form of giving back. It's serving the many in our ways of thinking of it. So, is that what it was all about, really?
I do. There was a very strong. Let me back up. The interesting thing that's happened with me, and I think it happens with most retirees, is if I look back at what I was thinking a year or two before retirement, and I compare it now, I've been retired 5.5 years, and if I look at the things I'm actually doing, a lot of those things wouldn't have even been on that list. Building a woodworking shop wouldn't have been on the list. Running a charity wouldn't have been on the list. The things that are important is the concepts and the ideas. I wanted to be generous. I wanted to find a way to give back. You know, we no longer needed to work for a living. So what could we do with our time that could give back to others? It was a time to give back. And that was a big philosophical keystone that I wanted to have. It's time to give back to others. How you do that and how it transpires, typically it evolves in ways that you don't see coming. So I think, to answer your question, yes, there was definitely an element of wanting to give back, wanting to create a legacy, but how that actually transpires and evolves in time, it's a very serendipitous process, and it's really fun to go through it. So we try a lot of different things, and you know, some stick, some don't. That's fine. It's exploration, it's curiosity. There's an interesting concept. I wrote an article about this called "The 4 Phases of Retirement." I didn't come up with the concept. I can't remember the guy that did, but Riley Gaines, I think it is, Riley Moynes. And his YouTube, he did a TED Talk on it, and it went viral, over 1 million views. And the thing where all this matters is 80-90% of retirees get stuck in phase two. Okay, phase one is vacation. Everybody experiences it. Great, hey, I'm retired. After about a year, most people go into this phase two, which is kind of you feel unsettled. Just things aren't quite right. And what it comes down to is all of those non-financial elements you used to get from work are gone, right? Your relationships, your purpose, your structure to your day, your objectives, all those things that you didn't even realize you were getting from work, you're starting to miss. So finding a way that you can replace each one of those in a retirement lifestyle is really important. And that's part of the keys of retirement too, is thinking about how you're going to replace these non-financial attributes that you once received from work. Relationships, huge one, right? There's a chapter in the book on that. Maybe you don't really like the people you work with. Okay, but you're still working with people, you're interacting with them, you're involved in relationships, and that's gone. And you always say, hey, we'll keep in touch. You never do, right? So finding a way to replace those relationships and start working on that before you get to retirement is really important. And focusing obviously on the relationship with your spouse or partner, because you're going to be spending a lot more time together. So there's a lot in the book about that and how you focus on relationships. And the interesting thing about the charity work, if you think about what we just talked about, it basically checks all those boxes on replacing those elements that I once got from work. It's a sense of identity, right? As is my writing. I'm an author. I'm also this guy that's running Freedom for Fido with my wife. So there's a sense of identity that you lose. So the relationships, we've got these great volunteers. We have a lot of fun, and those are all great relationships. It's physical activity. You're outside. You're getting exercise. It just checks all these boxes, and we never would have dreamed of running a charity. We knew we'd probably be involved in doing some kind of charitable work, but it's just interesting how that led to actually forming this charity and running it and getting all the benefits from it.
When it comes to finances, you just said the 4% rule. I'd love to just expand on that a little bit,
Sure.
but when I think of even my bank account, if I get nervous if I don't see it continually grow, right? If it stays
Yeah.
the same, or if it dips a little bit without a replenishment right away, I don't know. I just get this nervous feeling. So when people retire, my assumption is, well, they got 400,000 in the bank, and it's just going to dwindle over time, and they're going to die before it runs out.
Yeah.
So that is a plan that I think people live by. But when it comes to financial literacy and financial IQ, which we talk about on this podcast quite a bit, I believe there needs to be some type of understanding of wealth creation or growth. Therefore, you can sleep at night knowing your money's actually making you more money. So
Yeah.
before you left that job, did you start to see your money grow? And tell us a little bit about that. Maybe that hesitancy of, oh my God, I'm going into no man's land. I don't know what those expenses look like and all that. So what
Yeah.
was that
Yeah.
like, and what do you
Yeah.
recommend?
Yeah. The transition from accumulation during your career to withdrawal and retirement, or making withdrawals, it's a big transition. And I spend a lot of time, especially what I found, Mike, is as you're preparing for retirement, the financial stuff is a lot bigger than it is after you actually retire, if you've done a good job with the planning of it. And I dedicate an entire chapter in the book to kind of structuring your financials to get ready for this transition. And what I use is a bucket strategy, where basically I have bucket one for cash, about 3 years worth of spending. Bucket two is kind of income producing bonds primarily. That's maybe 6 years of spending. And then everything else is in stocks for long-term growth to help offset inflation. So when you look at,
And you
let's say
what,
you
just
have,
at like the S&P 500 basic
yeah, yeah.
index?
Yep, I'm a mutual fund guy, widely diversified Vanguard. I have a little bit of play money. I mess around with in a Charles Schwab account. I trade options and do stupid stuff, but that's just enough to scratch the itch. It's probably 5 or 10% of our entire portfolio.
Got
The
it.
vast majority of it, I leave it alone. It's in, I got Roth, I got IRAs, I've got, after tax accounts. Tax location is important too, especially if you retire early. Being able to get to those funds is part of the planning process as well, obviously, because you got to be 59 and a half, right, to tap into retirement accounts.
Yeah.
There's some ways to get around that, but basically, you've got to make sure you've developed that strategy to get between age 55 and 60 to when you can tap into the retirement funds. We do Roth conversions, we do all that kind of stuff. Back up to your question. part of the bucket strategy, and it's worked really well for us, is we have 3 years of cash sitting there, and I've basically replicated the paycheck. So every month there's money that it's the bucket one is sitting in a Capital One 360 money market fund, and every month it just automatically transfers what we know we can safely spend. Every year end, I look at our net worth. I'd subtract out the non-spendable assets, the house, the cars. So you come up with a liquidity pool that you can spend from. And I use about a 3.25% safe withdrawal rate just to be a little conservative. So I multiply that out, say, okay, we can spend X per year. Let's say it's, let's make the math easy. Let's say it's $60,000 a year. Well, that's $5,000 a month. So every month, $5,000 transfers over from this Capital One into our checking account, and we just spend it. That's fine. So if our checking account grows, we know we're underspending. Common problem in retirement, by the way. If we're starting to not get to the end of the month, oh, wait a minute, we better cut things back. So it automates your spending guardrails and keeps you within your safe withdrawal rate, just because the only thing you have to look at is your checking account. So it's beautiful. And then the second part of it is, at the end of the year, you can look at your Capital One 360 January 1st date to December 31st date. Guess what? You know how much you spent, because all that money you're spending is automatically transferring out of there.
Yeah.
So it works really well. Now, to your point about, do you watch that balance dwindle all the time? I mean, realistically, your net worth is going to grow. If you're pulling out 3 to 4%, you're hoping to get growth, let's say 8%-ish over time. If you got a 70-30, 80-20 portfolio, stocks and bonds. So you should see, and I've seen this since I've retired, even though you're spending out of it, your net worth continues to grow year on year. And you know, you'll have dips, sure. You know, the COVID thing, there was a correction. It never bothered me, because I knew we had enough liquidity to ride out, you know, any short-term blips, and over time things would typically correct. The trick is to avoid selling the stocks in a downturn and having these buckets. Some people argue, you don't really need all that. It's more of a mind game. Fine, if it's a mind game, it works. It keeps you from getting nervous when the market comes down, because you're looking at buckets 1 and 2 saying, you know what, I got enough liquidity in there, I don't have to worry about the stocks. It was interesting when stocks and bonds both went down at the same time, you know, a year or two ago. That was, you know, interesting, but I never got stressed about it, Mike. I knew we were in it for the long haul, and I knew we had some flexibility in our spending. As we were preparing for retirement, your question, how do you know how much you're going to spend? We've never been budgeters. We've always aggressively saved. By the end of my career, we were probably saving 40%.
Wow.
So we've always saved aggressively. It probably started at 6%, right? I got the match in the 401k, and that was it. But over time, we increased that. But where was I going with this? I just lost my train of thought. So we were always conservative. So as we were trying to get into how much are we going to spend for retirement, we never budgeted, because we just saved and we spent the rest. Well, now I'm like, we really need to know what we're spending, because, you know, ultimately the financial side of retirement is a math problem. How much are you going to spend, and how much income can you generate? So we went through an entire year, made it 11 months. I burned out after 11 months, but we tracked every penny we spent, set up a spreadsheet, manually typed in the receipts every couple days. And we tracked everything we spent, got an absolutely firm baseline, and said, okay, now let's think about what we want our life to be in retirement. How's it going to change? Well, we're going to sell the big house in the city. Okay, great. You can wipe out the mortgage. We paid off the cabin. So all you have left is property taxes and maintenance. Okay, fine. We want to start traveling in an RV. Okay, we got to buy the RV. Let's figure out some liquidity for that. Great. How much is that going to cost? Okay, we're going to travel so many days a year, you know, campground fees, blah, blah, blah. And we built a retirement spending forecast based on our known actual today, revised according to what we think is going to be our retirement lifestyle. And we were conservative. We estimate healthcare. I had to buy private healthcare. Still am. I'm only 61 now. So we always forecasted. I put in $2,500 a month for healthcare. I didn't know what it was going to cost. I knew 2,000 was about normal. It's going to inflate. And now we're spending about that. So, 6 years into retirement, we're just now spending what I forecast on year one. So we were conservative on all of our assumptions. And that has now, when we ended up with a spending number, there was some fluff in the number, and you could argue if you put too much fluff in it, you might be working longer than you have to. So there's a balancing act. But we build in, and then we build in some discretionary spending on top of that because we wanted to say, look, we don't want to just be able to get by. We want to be able to do things, right? We want to be able to travel. We want to be able to, spend a little bit of money, build this workshop, right? So we built some discretionary spending in there as well. So when the market was down, back to that point, we knew, number one, we had liquidity to cover the next 3 years, 2 to 3 years, and we could cut spending. There was enough discretionary stuff in the spending budget that we could cut some of that discretionary stuff out and reduce our spending if we had to. We never got to that point. So having those two work together eliminated all the anxiety. I didn't lose any sleep at all. As a matter of fact, I was actually investing some cash into the market during the downturn. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Amazing. So your finances were in order, probably because you had created the habit of saving. And it wasn't like you were living a very uh, crazy lifestyle where you were taking trips and all that throughout your work years. You basically were very, very diligent about saving your resources and being a great steward of them, it sounds like. So,
Yeah, but I'd also caution people against not spending enough, right? We always took vacations. I have a million miles on Deltas because I was in a global job. I was flying all over the world, so I had a bunch of frequent flyer miles. So every year, especially when our daughter was at home, we traveled to Europe. We'd go around the world.
oh,
We'd do stuff, but we did it for very low cost because I had frequent flyer miles, right? So we never got to the point where we were saving so aggressively that we weren't able to enjoy the today. So I think it's a balance of enjoy today, but also be responsible for tomorrow. And we were able to kind of, I probably could have retired 5 years earlier if we would have been, even more aggressive. But we didn't want to give up those opportunities to create memories, especially when our daughter was home. So it was a balance, we always, fortunately, my wife and I were both naturally frugal, but not obsessively frugal. So we never got caught up in keeping up with the Joneses. We always drove, used cars, never bothered me. We always bought less house than we could afford. But those weren't really sacrifices. It's just the way we were, So it worked well that our approach to financial management was compatible. And fortunately it was, we weren't big on materialism at all. The other thing I should mention, I've been an avid DIYer since probably in my mid 20s. I started tracking my net worth when I was 25. And I've always read, even back when all you could get was, physical magazines. I read Money Magazine, Kiplinger's, all those magazines,
oh yeah.
read them for decades. And I've always personally managed our money, never had a concern with doing it. And it's served us well as we were planning for and now living in retirement.
So are you in that cabin now, the one that you bought
Yep.
before? Okay,
Yep.
so when did you buy that cabin? Because one thing that I'm thinking of, I'm 39 years old.
Yep.
When do I want to start to build that, that whether it's that farm or a cabin or a lake
Yep.
house. So I start to invest in it, and therefore because I mean, I sold my house in 2020 whenever it was at its top. I couldn't believe I got certain money for it. And so I moved into an apartment, but it's probably not going to be something I'm here forever. And I would
Yeah.
want to invest in some type of lake house. So what year was that? And
Yeah.
I guess maybe how long did it take to get to a point where you're like, man, I could just live here forever?
Yeah. We bought the cabin 10 years before I retired, so I was 45. And we bought it for two reasons. One was my mother-in-law moved in with us, and she had Alzheimer's. So we actually spent a weekend, came up to a cabin with her, and we were like, man, this is a perfect thing we can do with her. It was 2 hours away from Atlanta. We could come up for the weekends. So number one, it was for short-term enjoyment right now, something we could do with mom. Never really thought of it as a retirement destination, but potentially it was out there. The second reason was we knew we could rent it. It's a crazy hot rental market up in this area. It's a big vacation destination. So there's a lot of rental cabins. We knew we could rent it, which we did for, quite a while and made money on it. So my view was if the rental income will at least pay the mortgage, great. We're building equity without having to put anything into it. And we did better than that. So the logic was let's get this thing kind of a second income, second property rental income strategy. And as we spent more time up here, we just fell in love with the area. And I would say probably 4 or 5 years out from retirement, we knew this is where we wanted to retire. So then we started looking at, okay, let's look at the downsizing strategy. We'll take the home equity, use that towards your retirement savings, that type of thing. But we didn't buy it necessarily for that. I think having a place that you have a pretty good comfort level that you can rent it and create a second income stream out of it makes it a lot easier to kind of experiment and then decide if you love the area enough that that's where you want to live full time.
Hmm. What do you think people struggle with the most? Is it the fact that they maybe didn't plan their finances the right way? I mean, you have a blog, you probably get the same questions over and over from people, but
Yeah.
the finances or the mental health aspect, right? Keeping themselves
Yeah.
busy, maybe even having, obviously there is health in general, right? Their health starts to decline, they can't do certain things that they've wanted to
Yeah.
do. I know my dad had a seizure not too long ago, so just as a precaution, they took away his license for 6 months. So uh,
Yeah.
he's doing really well. It's just like, well, they need to see if I'm okay. So there's so many of these crazy adjustments, mental health wise, because of your purpose and maybe not having your social community, but
Yeah.
also health in general and the finances, many variables. So
Yeah.
what do people struggle with the most and why?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a bimodal population, to be honest. You hear about the retirement crisis, and 50% of people 50 and older don't have anything saved for retirement. Clearly, for them, it's 100% financial. They are going to be really in trouble, and they're starting to realize that, right? Those people aren't watching your show. Those people aren't reading my blog, right? It's just an unfortunate reality. Those are the people that need to be, but
Yep.
they're realistically the people that aren't. So the people that are consuming content that are, self learners want to understand this stuff, they tend to have their financial stuff pretty well under control. There's still anxiety as you're getting ready to retire. That's your number one concern. Am I going to outlive my money? But what I found is once people retire, so they've gotten to the point where they're talking to their, either if they've got an advisor, they're, yeah, you can do it, you're good to go, go ahead and leave. Once you make that decision to leave, 95% of the people that struggle in retirement struggle over the non-financial issues. That's where people get in trouble.
Got it.
And the vast majority of people that go back to work, they don't go back to work for the money. They go back to work because they're looking for that relationship, that sense of purpose, that structure, that identity, all those things we talked about. You can get that back easily. You can go back to work, right? To me, that shouldn't be your default option, but it
Good call.
works. Yeah, but it works. So a lot of those people that you hear about going back to work, you ask them why. Well, I was kind of bored. I was kind of struggling with what to do. It's all those things. Okay, good. Knock yourself out. That's fine. But they're not doing it for the money. And to me, and that's what the book's all about, a much better approach is to try to figure out how you can get the fulfillment in all of those non-financial areas in a new way. You don't have to go back to work to get them. There's a new way to get it that's a lot more exciting, a lot more fun, but it's hard. It's not a spreadsheet where you can just go through a checklist and put a bunch of numbers together. No, I figured out my purpose. It's a more artistic, right brain, artistic, cerebral, self-awareness, reflection, curiosity, exploration, trial and error type of process that's really hard to explain to people. And that's where people struggle. That's that phase two that I talked about earlier. People get into this funk, and the way you get out of it and move into phase three is through trial and experimentation. And some of those experiments are going to fail, some of those experiments are going to work. And then once you get a couple of them that work, I've got my blog, we've got Freedom for Fido, we got a couple things that are working here, right? And we're getting that fulfillment, but it was through a process of experimentation. I mentioned I started my blog purely as an experiment, but I started it 3 years before I retired, right? That's the big lesson I got from my experience and what the book focuses on. The more of this type of thing you can do in your last couple of years of work, the more the smoother that transition will be, because those things will be starting to bear fruit. It's kind of like starting a second income, a side hustle. You're not going to be hitting it on day one, right? It's going to take you a year to scale this thing and figure out how to deal with the social media and the promotion and write a book. Those things take time. And if you can build in a little bit of a lead time, get some of that stuff underway in your last couple of years of work, it makes the transition a lot smoother.
We interviewed many people who have sold businesses and now help people sell businesses. And one thing they taught me was even if you love your business, build your business as if you're going to sell it, and you're going to put standard
Great
operating
advice.
procedures in place, put
Yep.
things in make sure that you have certain ways of doing business. Therefore, it's not relying on you. Therefore, it becomes a sellable asset. Now, the reason why that's why that's beneficial is because you build it in a way that gives you options in life. And
Yeah.
so, I take that lesson and I apply it to, let's just say, retirement. Let's just say that you love your job and you never want to retire. Well, start to plant the seeds that when you retire, you have these motorcycle trips with your buddies, right? Or
Yeah.
you have this charity you want to work on, or this book you want to write. So now you have this checklist, which gives you this mission still in life. And I would think that a lot of people don't think about that until they punch out where,
Yeah.
okay, once this chapter ends, I'll start thinking about it. By that time, it's too late. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably where people get caught in a wheel of pain, I guess.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what else, Mike, is the vast, I think 55% of people are forced into retirement earlier than they planned. Now, that's probably lower for entrepreneurs and people that run their own business. They've got a little bit more autonomy. But as a whole, the majority of people are forced into retirement earlier than they plan. So you're thinking, hey, I love my job. I'm gonna work till I'm 70 because I just love what I'm doing. Well, guess what? You're probably not. Your spouse might get sick. You might need to take time off for your spouse. You might get fired, downsized. As you get older, like it or not, ageism is a thing, and you're less valuable. Now, my dad was in the academic world, and I would argue in the academic world it's a little bit different. Age tends to be respected more, but outside of that, in almost every profession, as you get older, your employment risk goes up. So don't and the people that struggle the most are the hard charging type A, conquer the mountain, and they just think they're going to work forever. They love what they're doing. They're totally tied to their sense of identity is tied into work, and they get fired. They never saw it coming. Those are the people that struggle the most with the transition, and
Hmm.
it can be pretty hard. There's a guy named Mike Drack. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote a book called Retirement Heaven or Hell, and he was a pretty high level banker. Got fired, didn't see it coming. Type A, went into retirement hell, and the book is all about his transition from retirement hell and finding his way to retirement heaven. So yeah, a lot of people struggle with it.
Well, in your book, it's cool that you put this in here, but the passion resources, those people who are struggling for that, what the hell do I do now? I mean, what do I really love? I would assume that it's almost as if like there are some dreams that you let go of when you were a kid to pursue this family or this career. And maybe this is the time to go back. And you have some resources here, whether it's Help Guide, Mental Health America, SAM, HSA,
Yep.
all kinds of different resources. I would think that to me, I've always just pursued if I'm passionate about it, I bet I could keep doing it for a while, but I got to make sure it's part of my perfect average day. If I love it, I'm going to keep it in there. Of course, I don't have any kids or I'm not married, so there are certain things that I really didn't have to give up in order to just keep my business going. So I like how you put this in here because I do see a lot of people, and I've been out with some girls recently who are in the 35 to 45-year-old range. And I'm like, what do you like to do for fun? Fun? I don't have any things I do for fun. I take care of my kids, like, oh,
Yeah.
wait a second. You don't know what you like as a hobby
Yeah.
or a passion? That's crazy to me, but that's out there. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you what too. you know, going from, especially now, you're talking 35 to 45. Well, think of that woman, in your case, this example, a woman, let's say it's 20 years later. Now she's
Yes.
55 to 65. She's 20 years deeper into that trench. And she still doesn't have hobbies and things that she likes. Now the kids are gone, so she's kind of, depressed because she's an empty nester and, whatever. But the reality of it is, ever since you get out of school, I would even argue while you're in school, you're programmed into this approach to life of, you got to get that score on the test so you can get the good job, blah, 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 blah. When you get into the job, you're getting all these assignments from the boss. You got to do a good job so you can get the raise. And your whole external influence is around delivering on the work stuff. And that, if you don't fight it, and very few people do, that kind of blocks out that element of your brain that you used to use as a kid when you would just go out and explore and have fun. And learning how to do that again and find new hobbies and experiment with new things, that takes some time. That's part of this transition and why a lot of people struggle in this phase too, you've kind of got to reprogram your brain into being open to, instead of just delivering on the task and the thing at work, now it's exploration and experimentation. And my biggest thing to people is really foster your sense of curiosity.
There you go.
And
That
if
word.
you,
I was thinking
if
of that
I
word for
love
you.
curiosity, yeah, and if you're curious about something, my writing, great example. I was a little bit curious about starting a blog. I was a little bit curious about writing. I love personal finance. I always did. So what did I do? I took that first step. I started the blog. 8 years later, I've written a book. It's become a big part of my identity. It's who I am. I have all the interactions with my readers. I talk to podcast hosts like Mike, right? All that stuff came because I had that curiosity to pursue that writing thing. And that girl that you're dating isn't pursuing that writing thing, right? She's focused on getting that job done and taking care of the kid. And she's not experimenting and exploring because you just don't at that phase in life. That's the skill you've got to really energize as you're getting ready to make this transition.
Curiosity is a superpower. And I
Yeah,
can tell that that is something you encompass quite a bit because you're
yeah,
curious about what it's like for people who are struggling with retirement. What you're curious about how we could probably grow this Freedom for Fido charity, right? You're curious about just woodworking in general. You're curious about writing in general, but also you're curious about things like what I see behind you when it comes to war history, right?
yeah,
Gettysburg and
yeah,
Civil War. And
yeah,
this will keep your mind busy. So there's a
yeah.
great study that was done. I think it was a 25-year study. And this might be something you might want to put in your blog, or you probably already know about it, but 25-year
Oh,
study.
Harvard. Yep.
Well, I don't know if it's the
Oh,
one, but
maybe not. Okay, sorry.
25-year
Shouldn't have.
study, and it showed individuals who lived longer. Uh, they, the people who basically did paddle sports lived on average, I think 7 or 8 years longer than the average person. Okay.
Huh.
So
Okay.
those who did badminton, are you ready for this? Badminton, 6.2 years longer than the average
Oh,
person.
oh my goodness.
And then the person who did tennis, 9.2 years longer. So look
Wow.
at this. Okay. Now they broke it down into why is this person living longer? Well, the brain has to have this fast twitch muscle to make decisions on the fly, which keep it operational at a high level, but also because it's low impact, you're able to stay around and do it for a long time, but it's finesse and therefore it's cardio, therefore it's taking care of the body,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it gives the excitement of competition that men need,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So
Perfect. Makes
all of
sense.
this, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, when I see what you're out there doing, it's basically you need something to keep the brain operational at a very high
Yep.
level and
Yep.
curiosity, but also pursuing things that are like, the war history. What did they do? What did Adam Smith talk about in his book, The Wealth of Nations,
Yep.
right? Like, I want to find
Yep.
out more about that. So,
Yep.
if there's anything you could say about that, because I'm so blown
Yeah.
away by war history myself that if I ever did get really bored, I think I could get in my Jeep and just drive to Gettysburg. I'm not too far away.
Absolutely. I'll tell you two things, Mike. One is absolutely you got to exercise your brain, right? Your brain got exercise at work. That's one thing work did provide. It provided that mental challenge. You've got to find a way to replace that. So you've got to find a way to challenge your brain. My writing does that, right? Interacting with podcast guests, you got to think. You're on your feet. I also play paddle sports, pickleball. Unfortunately, I'm an old guy. Everybody's playing pickleball,
Yeah,
but
right.
yeah,
No wonder, man.
that's okay. But you take care of your brain and you take care of your body. You know, I bought a spin bike, you know, Peloton. I got the Nordic Track knockoff. It was cheaper, but I work out 3 to 4 days a week hard. You know, I do weights, I do cardio, I run. I still run. I'm 61 years old. I run, I trail run, I hike, I do all kinds of stuff. So I really focus on the physical activity because that's one thing you can control, and that is going to help. You know, it's all. I don't know if you've read. I just drew a blank. It's lifespan, not health span, right? Yeah, Peter Attia.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's all about you want to live as many years healthily as you can, because what good is it if you're, you know, in a nursing home? Yeah, okay, you got all the money you need, but you're a vegetable in a nursing home. Nobody wants to live that way. You
Right.
can control that to some extent, to a large extent, by physical activity. That's number one. Number two, you can do the same thing with your brain, and I think you have to do that thing with your brain. And you're a book guy, right? $1 million book right there behind you in neon. Books are a great way to exercise the mind because you're pulling this intelligence. You know, to write a book like this, yeah, simple little book, took me 6 months, right? It's a lot of work. You're really trying to pull the best stuff out of your brain, and then it gets edited and refined and worked on. Every book is like that. So every book is a wealth of knowledge from somebody that's gone before you, and you can read a book on anything. So, just last week we were on vacation. We were up near the DC area, and I like to read a lot of different types of topics. So I was reading a book about the Civil War, Gods and Generals, great book by the way. It focuses on four generals through the Civil War, and I was reading this chapter about Fredericksburg, worst Northern Union loss in the war. They got slaughtered. It was brutal, and and we were not that far away from Fredericksburg. And literally, when we went on this vacation, we said, let's make this vacation different. Here you go about not getting stuck in a rut, keeping yourself open to things. So we said, we're going to make this vacation different. We're not going to schedule anything. It's going to be a total serendipity vacation. So the day before, we're hanging around DC. We're like, oh, what are we going to do tomorrow? And I'm like, I can't believe this, but this is like, we're laying in bed 10 o'clock at night. I said, I just finished this chapter on Fredericksburg. That's only like an hour from here. What do you say we go down to Fredericksburg tomorrow and check it out? So we did. And so I had just read about the battle, and then I went down and I saw the battlefield where it happened. So one of the things, I wrote an article about it. Actually, it hasn't come out yet. It's coming out next week. 3 tips to improve your retirement. And one of them was, build a vacation around something you're reading, right? If you're interested in a book and Yorktown, we went to Yorktown when we were in the area. I'd read a book maybe a year ago about Yorktown, which is where we won the Revolutionary War. I do like history. And we were like, hey, Yorktown's pretty close. Let's go down to Yorktown and see where, we stuck it to the Brits. So that was cool. So read about things. And as you read, Daniel Boone, another one, Cumberland Gap, where he first found the path over the Appalachian Mountains during the westward expansion. I was like, we're laying out this path where we're going to go. And I was like, why don't we come back through Cumberland Gap? I've always wanted to see it. So less than a week ago, I literally hiked over Cumberland Gap, right where Daniel Boone did, and I'd read about it in the book. And when you've read about it in a book and then you go experience it physically in person, man, it just comes alive. Be it a battlefield, be it a Cumberland Gap type of thing. Find something that interests you, read about it, and then take a trip and go see the place. Those are the ways you can challenge your brain to stay engaged and have fun in the process.
Yeah, I love that. I drove around the country a couple years ago in my Jeep, and everywhere I was going, by the way, very serendipitous myself, where I was just like, where do I want to go? All right, let's go check out Mount Rushmore, right? So
Perfect. Yep.
while I'm driving there, I'd put on the YouTube like documentary of how they built it, and I'm just like
Perfect.
blown away. By the time I get there, I'm like, oh my God, look, I gotta check that out. I gotta check that out. So
Yeah.
it could just be an audiobook even. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like what you're
Absolutely.
saying.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, the book, guys, is called Keys to a Successful Retirement: Staying Happy, Active, and Productive in Your Retired Years. You have this charity, Freedom for Fido. Is it freedomforfido.org? Is it easy to find on there?
It sure is. Yep. We're on Facebook. We got our website. We're everywhere. Yeah. Look us up.
My God, that fits my core values. So I got to look into that. I'm a big dog fanatic, and freedom is my core value. So my God, we can actually bridge the gap, and maybe there's a way we can work together, and I can
Let me
support that.
let me encourage you, Mike. Look on our Facebook page. We have a website, but on our Facebook page, we actually post every build that we do, and at the end of the builds, we call it Freedom Day, and we take these dogs off the chains and we let them run for the first time. And even after 130 builds, man, it still brings tears to your eyes when you see these dogs that have been on chain for 5, 6, 7 years and they're able to run for the first time. Man, that's what giving back's all about. So freedom, absolutely, and there's a reason we put freedom in the name. I'm a freedom guy too, just like you.
Oh
and
my
and and
God.
and, and that is so rewarding to know that you made a difference. So check out our Facebook page, Freedom for Fido on Facebook, and you'll see videos of these dogs running free, and you'll see a bunch of pictures of me and all of our volunteers. You can tell we're having fun. It's a great time. So I appreciate you giving us a shout out on the charity too.
Oh,
That's
I
awesome.
commend that. So whatever I could do, I want to support it in some way. So I'm going to take a look at it and see what we can do. But guys, check out that. I know everybody that pretty much follows me knows I'm a dog lover, and many dog lovers in our community. So check it out. Also, the blog, I want to give that blog a shout out too. What's the blog website?
Yep, the Retirement Manifesto. Yep, or you can just Google my name, Fritz Gilbert, and you'll find it that way. But the Retirement Manifesto.
Beautiful. Guys, his book has over 1,104 reviews, 4.5 stars, resonating with the world. Just came out in 2020. And so if you're out there, whether you're about to retire or you know someone who has or is going to go through that, it's a great book for it. And he's obviously a patriot who knows how important it is to keep this country free. So Fritz Gilbert, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate your time and also rescheduling with me. That was awesome of you.
Hey, no problem. Happy to do it. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.